way to look at that. My worry is what when that officer is off work, what when the officer is ill, because there is a small amount of time in which police have to enforce those measures on the roads, and we can't let that slip. So please don't think that's got beyond my notice, but it's a very good question. I've challenged the chief on it, and this is getting into the nitty-gritty, Bob, of positiveness and where we actually make improvements. So I do thank you for the challenge, and I will rise to that challenge of making sure the chief's fully considered it. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Evan.
Thank you, Evan.
Yeah, thanks, Bob, and thanks, Commissioner. And I was in on that scrutiny meeting, and yeah, the uptake of dashcam footage has been considerable, and the Commissioner was seeking to maintain public confidence by having an effective analyst who looks at all that stuff, and it's not just lost in the system. So I know that's very much on the agenda of the Commissioner. Thanks for that. Norman Plumpton-Walsh, followed by Councillor Riley.
Yes, Commissioner, good afternoon. Hope you're okay. I have an allied point that Bob has just raised, obviously going through the same papers. My point was on the community speed watch, which is obviously an informal speed management process. I have a constituent who is indeed my next door neighbour, who was last week driving down a local road here, and somebody came up the wrong side of the road at pretty much full pelt, was nearly involved in a head-on collision. She's heavily pregnant herself. She came home and had a panic attack. As a result, the only footage that seems to be available is on a nearby building down one of the local roads here, which I'm grateful to say at the moment our dedicated PCSO is actually hopefully looking at that at the moment to try and find the perpetrator. Now, obviously, my thing here would be enforcement, because I'm looking at enforcement around here for a whole range of things at the moment. I think we are beyond, with a certain element of people, I think we are beyond the warning letters that are generated via the volunteers. It mentions here on page 26 of the scrutiny papers that obviously warning letters go out. What happens then if that same person is called again having received a warning letter? I think we all know nowadays that warning letters are just that. Sometimes people read them and they just say, yeah, well, okay, whatever, it's not been enforced. So it goes along to Bob's point. If they're to receive a second letter, do they then receive a fine, or do the penalties get stiffer as they're caught more often than once? Because again, that's from my experience, that's what tends to happen. It tends to be the same people. So I'd just like to see if that could be beefed up. And in the same instance, if we can have a recruitment drive of the community speed watch, because it's something that my local PCSO has actually asked me for. So if we've got anything wider that we can do in the county to get volunteers out there, because they are there, we just need to find them. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Norman. If I may, Evan, I would first of all want to pass my congratulations to Norman on his really exceptionally good news, and to your good lady wife, Norman. Real congratulations. There, I'm sure you'll both have your hands full.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Really sad to see the impact on your next door neighbour. Pregnancy is a wonderful time, isn't it? But it's a time where things will have great kind of worries carrying the future of our kind of families and communities. I really understand the anxiety and the response there to experience. It's completely unacceptable. Norman, on the community speed watch, I've scrutinised this in the recent past after funding lots of community speed watch schemes. Community speed watch for me is one of the best areas where people from the communities become involved in keeping the community safe. They do face some challenges in terms of enforcement, but a lot of this stuff is geared towards prevention. I always think we need to look at prevention and changing cultures as well as enforcement. I can't give you comment on operational decisions in policing, as you'll be aware, and I really don't want to be kind of pushed to stray out of my domain into kind of saying when police should pursue something or shouldn't pursue something, but I absolutely get your point. They need to be operational decisions based on the exact circumstances of the case. My real drive with this, Norman, and you'll know it has been right since 2016, was I want to change the culture on our roads in Cheshire. And I think the only way you change the culture is by changing the behaviour of human beings. And we are all kind of, our behaviours are habitual. So the measures I've tried to take to change behaviour, because this is what it needs, is by putting an asset in every community as a PCSO to do at least 1 hour of speed awareness enforcement every single week. That for me should mean that in all of our communities, if the PCSO does that and is able to move around different roads in your local community to deliver that, that should deliver a position where local residents don't know where your PCSO will be at any one time in that week with the TrueCam, which is the enforceable speed gun. Put onto that the scheme that we're putting forward in the budget to replace or to enhance many of our areas where we currently have yellow boxes, which I think many of us share the view are effective for the exact space that they cover, but don't really make a difference over a whole roadway. So lots of people, for instance, will go faster than the speed limit up to the yellow box, will slow down to comply for maybe 100 metres and then will speed off in frustration. I am proposing some average speed areas in Cheshire within the budget for the next year. That's a really big investment working with local authorities, and they'll be geared towards the areas where we have the most killed and seriously injured numbers. They'll hopefully be at least a mile long. I'm hoping for at least 8 of those extras over the next year in Cheshire, and I'm hoping that they will be across all of our local authorities to give some real kind of reassurance that funding's being put out there fairly and where the needs are. So beyond the community speed watch, beyond the PCSOs, beyond the strategic measures I want to put in on community, on the average speed checks, the whole roads and crime unit are there to deliver. That's about 120 officers that deal with roads issues. I really want to use all that in the best way to change habits, because that's the only way we're going to win this. There's some people that view it as a right rather than a privilege to be on the road. We've really got to get responsibilities right. Over the last year, speed awareness courses have dropped. That's because they can't be held within COVID. Some enforcement has dropped because of COVID as well, as Bob rightly asserted. We need to get this completely back on track to show that the results of killed and seriously injured people, even 37 is 37 too many. I'm envisaging a Cheshire within the new police and crime plan where the aspiration is no killed or seriously injured on our road due to changes of habit, which may take a few years, Norma, but please accept with all that my real commitment to getting this right, because it's probably the top priority that exists in every single community in Cheshire. There's nowhere without those fears, and there's nowhere without those problems or those objectives to remove them. So I'll be doing my best, Norman.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner. Councillor Riley.
Thank you, Chair. I have 2 questions, and I will pick my words carefully, David. Going forward, I hope we can do that, and I'm allowed to ask questions in the spirit that I wish to raise them on behalf of the feedback that I get as an elected representative. So recruitment, we've looked or talked quite extensively this morning about police numbers, but you've just obviously alluded to the suitably qualified staffing element that support those frontline police officers. So I'm very interested to know a little bit more about the current capacity and your proposals in the plan going forward for suitably qualified staff, particularly around data analysis and particularly cybercrime. You know, your letter that I alluded to before, I think goes some way to reassuring populations like we have in Frodsham. But one of the things that exercises quite a few of our residents is how vulnerable they are to online scams that look very legitimate, but are, you know, it's very easy to fall foul of them. So, you know, with the greatest respect, you know, we do need those detailed specialisms, as you will need for all of that work around serious and organised crime. So I'll be very interested for your comments on that. I made a comment earlier on about suitable data analysis, and I think when we're looking at things like road safety, you know, it'd be very interesting if you could respond to the point I raised about in recent years there's been some question mark, shall we say, around the accuracy and the reliability, the robustness of that data in terms of KSI, because as we all know, very sadly and very tragically, a large number of the K element of that cohort takes place on our rural roads. And not in the places where our PCSOs are deployed with the true crams. So again, a little bit of a rural dimension to your answer would be appreciated. And my third and final question is around the sort of current COVID pandemic. And I'd be very interested to know what provision you have within your custody suites for testing people who are both booked into custody to protect your frontline staff, but also on discharge. Because as we've seen across the whole of Cheshire, we've had some very worrying spikes in infection rate and community transmission over the last 12 months. And I'm very interested to know what provision you have made to, you know, to ensure that Cheshire Police is playing its role in containing that community transmission. So those three would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn, and really good questions. Getting to the heart of some of the current issues we've got there. On our kind of staff front, major investments this year and going into next year are around our FCC, the Force Control Centre, the call centre where the 101 999 calls go into. I want that to be the best service. I want to encourage less frustrating waiting times, which I do agree we've experienced in the past in policing. I want people to be able to get through, to have their calls recorded well, because actions can only come from those calls if they're recorded accurately and service is dispatched in the best way that we can. I note the earlier comments about GMP. I won't comment on GMP, but I will say the scrutiny that I've put into crime data integrity over the last few years it is absolutely huge, taking us from a previous poor position to being outstanding in the area was one of my early tasks with Darren Martland, actually before he was Chief Constable, when he was Deputy Chief Constable. On the very important issue of cybercrime, Lynn, and I have actually received some correspondence from Frodsham, as you say, from residents on this issue. It's a huge issue that is absolutely international. You know, the victim or the fraudster could be anywhere in the world. This rate of crime is going up. Cyber-enabled crime, where there's some element of cyber in the crime that's committed, is vastly on the increase. We're taking various approaches to that. In Cheshire, we do have a dedicated cybercrime unit. We also have the connections for the most serious matters on a regional level, and of course nationally with Action Fraud, who I've tried to bring some real scrutiny through my relationship nationally with the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, because I didn't feel Cheshire was getting a good service from that national service at all. So there's been some real challenges there. Locally, I believe the best thing that we can do against cybercrime is to educate. and to prevent it happening. Because when offenders are all over the world, bringing justice to people can be very, very difficult. So education is absolutely important. I know that you and others kind of do promote these things on social media, and I'm grateful for that. Our PCSOs are trained and will be more trained in this in order to get out there educating small businesses. I have dealt with one of your businesses, actually in Frodsham again, on an attack of cybercrime, and did make sure that they got the service that they deserved on the matter. So it's really the best thing we can do on this is prevention, and then working together to resolve and recover wherever we can. I don't underestimate the complex issues with that, but I do believe that we can make a huge difference by really investing in prevention and talking about these things. And I think our PCSOs and our specialists have got the ability to do those in our communities, as have community representatives, because community safety is about more than policing. You know, it's about local authorities, fire and rescue, health partners. It's a much wider kind of shared aspect that I can refer to. I'm just trying to look at my notes that I've made, Lynn, there with a pen that's just failed on me on your other questions. Lynn, could you just bring me back to the push of your final question there, if you wouldn't mind?
Yes, I'm quite happy to take a written response on the sort of size and scope of the cyber team, David.
Yes.
My final question was about the custody suites and the lateral flow testing that you might want to consider putting in place. I don't believe it's in place at the moment, but I'm sure you'll disavow me of that if I've somehow offended you by making a statement rather than asking a question.
Lynn, absolutely not. Where the statements are fine, I'm absolutely fine with them. And you know, perhaps you have to forgive my approach from earlier, but I do have to challenge, and you would always challenge factual inaccuracies as well. I mean, it's a mature relationship we're in, and I certainly don't take offence of it. So thanks for your understanding, Lynn. I will, on that operational issue, I'll get back to the Chief Constable. I'll be back in touch with you. I do know that tests aren't available in our custody suites for COVID. If tests were available in our custody suites for COVID, it would raise the question of why aren't our officers being kind of tested there as well, and kind of giving vaccines, etc. there. So vaccines, etc. won't be available in there, would be my message. But let me give you an operational view from the Chief Constable, who will no doubt go down to Leeds for custody to let you know exactly what the process is to protect people when people are coming in, when people are going out. I do know that the cleaning mechanisms have been changed in custody because they have a deep interest in making sure that officers are safe. So I'm very aware of some of the deep cleaning arrangements and more regular cleaning arrangements that have been put into place. But let me come back to you on those other issues of lateral flow and potential of vaccinations. We clearly need to be able to refer people for those if there is an issue. So let me get you a deeper operational briefing from the Chief, and I'll get that over to you as soon as I can. Thanks.
Okay, and if while you're doing that, David, you could just reassure us that there is a testing protocol in place for the constabulary, I think we'd all be reassured by that. We're aware, obviously, that they're not in the priority tiers for vulnerability. You discuss that at all by all means, but I would have hoped that all the officers have been regularly tested, if only to assure as many people as possible for active duty as possible. So your reassurance on that would be gratefully received. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. I can assure you that there is a testing protocol for officers, and I'll see what information the Chief Constable can give on that. I do know a number of our officers have been tested and been found both negative and positive for the virus. So let me come back to you with some reassurance there, which is of course vital to keep officers safe and the public safe in contact with our officers. So good question and very much welcome. Thanks, Lynn.
Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, Commissioner. I've got two more speakers, but just prior to that, more a comment to you, Commissioner, than a question. Last year, you were very successful with Safe Streets Fund, 550,000 on prevention around acquisitive crime. Just a heads up, I'm sure you've clocked it. The Home Office have announced it again this week. So we're looking for another very successful bid, and we'll support you in any way we can towards that aim. Okay?
Thank you, Evan. Can I just mention on that, Evan, my team are looking at that at the moment in some depth. I know you gave me a tip-off last year, which was really, really useful. It led to over £500,000 coming in. Just to note this year, the struggle that I know I'll have in advance is I think the government require me to put 20% funding into it. That will obviously lower the abilities within the budgets we've got of forces being able to access that money, but I will be doing my very best. And my current inquiry is, can I use pocket money to make up that 20%? If I can, I'll be doing my best to do that. But to take that money out of the revenue budget of Cheshire Police, if we're looking for the same again, it's going to cost 110,000 of revenue money. I'm going to really have to have a conversation with the chief where he gets that from. So I'll be doing my best. Thanks, Chair.
In conjunction with local authorities, isn't it?
Yeah, there's an offer from Councillor Finlow.
Well, I read, Chairman, that this funding for the Safer Streets Fund, which the government will now put a total funding in of 45 million over 2 years, will enable commissioners and local authorities to make interventions to cut crime. So I presume there's some sort of partnership arrangement, which I'm sure we'd all welcome.
Yes, I'd certainly like to think so. We just need to really invest with our local authorities for where they get the money from then. If it's not policing money, which is few and far between, I still do provide local authorities with community safety partnership money at the moment, which isn't ring fenced for many years now, but I've managed to hold on to that. So it may be an impact of funny money, as the government has it, from me giving the money away to local authorities to getting it back in to kind of co-fund my own project with the government. But I appreciate what you're saying, Paul, and we'll certainly do our best to make something happen in Cheshire again.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Commissioner. Some of you may have seen, I unfortunately have a pre-booked appointment at 13:35, so I'll need to leave the meeting in 10 minutes. I have a feeling we're just about getting there. If I can bring Councillor Thompson in.
Yeah, Commissioner, I think you'll probably agree with me that good policing is intelligence-led, and one of those techniques, of course, the police will, under Section 1 of PACE, there's times when they'll, with reasonable cause and suspicion, officers will do stop and search. And the figures for Cheshire are just about consistent with the figures nationally. Now, I've said this previously at the panel some time ago, but there are now new figures to look at. I am concerned that Cheshire Constabulary, there was in the financial year up to March 2020, there was a 276% increase in the use of Section 60. Now, for those that don't know, under Section 60 powers, that is where the police don't have to have reasonable suspicion. They can simply just randomly in your area for a defined reason. Let's say there was a stabbing at some point. They can start without any indiscriminately doing stop and search. I've always been of the view that's a really bad power. And it's interesting. The previous Home Secretary, Theresa May, suspended it. And then obviously the government have allowed it again. And I'm gravely concerned, and I believe that in one of the scrutiny meetings, you raised this. I don't know what your question was or what the Chief Constable's answer was, but you raised this at a scrutiny meeting. I'm concerned about Section 60 simply because look what comes from it. The figures for Section 60 stop and search for Cheshire are something like 3%, and of those 3% who they have found something, invariably it could be that cannabis or whatever, it is not in connection with the reason why they've introduced section 60. So I think it's a very ineffective tool, and it's an insult to officers actually, because policing should be intelligence led. Now, where this leads to, and my question to you, and I don't know what the answer was from the Chief Constable, the figures show that in the financial year up to March 2020, if you were black, you were 8 times more likely to be stopped than if you were white. Now, you and I both know that the average police officer in Cheshire is not a racist, but by even allowing and having and using Section 60, we're undermining the force, we're undermining good techniques, we're not instilling confidence with the public, and there are other techniques we can use. So I wanted to ask you, in terms of the holding the Chief Constable to account and his use of Section 60, what has he had to say about that? Because I think it's a very ineffective tool.
Thank you, Dave, and I'll be brief if I may, Chairman, because I know at times amongst us, but we must take this up in a deeper sense when we have more time. I have held the Chief to account. What I have to say, first of all, Dave, is the figures that you gave of 8 times more likely is correct for general stop and search, but doesn't relate to the Section 60 stop and searches. It is a figure that relates to a different set of wider stop and search statistics. That doesn't mean it's any more acceptable, because it's certainly not. The issues you raise around legitimacy are absolutely correct. We need to be legitimate and seen as proportionate in our communities. The government did introduce the Section 60 legislation for particular reasons, so it is a national legislation rather than, if you like, a ruling within Cheshire. Nevertheless, for me, I think most of the incidents to do with the Section 60, as you rightly say, were about knife crimes. They could be assaults right down to murder, and I think the constabulary has used the powers available in some of those situations, particularly where we have had loss of life. I think from memory, Dave, they did it happen in Runcorn and in Crewe. Knife crime it is one of those difficult areas to deal with, and I think policing try to find the most proportionate way of responding to that. I think there's a really wide debate with this one, though, as to what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. Perhaps if I could get some data that we could have a look through that's obviously doesn't include any personal details, etc. I think this is worthy of a deeper dive where you can make some real kind of deep dives and real conclusions, and probably advice back to the Chief about how this approach is used and not using in the future. I do recognise we've had correspondence off you on it. It is a key issue, and we need to be make sure our police service is acting proportionately and legitimately. So it's, police is a difficult area, isn't it, Dave? Because it involves all our liberty, freedom of movement. It needs to be intelligence based. It needs to be proportionate. It needs to be legitimate. So it is an avenue that we need together to explore further.
Chair, if there's any coming back, we can do that in writing, because I'm very conscious of the time. But I thought it was important to raise this as an issue. So thanks for that, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Commissioner. And perhaps food for thought subject matter for our March informal meeting. Okay. Can I take Laura Judah, and that feel this may be our final question? Laura?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And Commissioner, I'd like to just ask a couple of quick questions, and I think you could probably give me a quick answer. The first two are quick, the third one probably isn't. On pages 17 and 18 of the Scrutiny Board minutes from the 16th of December, there's in 3.4, I just want to ask about the anti-stalking unit, because you asked the Chief Constable and about that, and I'm wondering if you've had a response, and also about young people held in custody and mental health issues. So I think there was a fairly quick, and you may be able to give me a quick answer. But my third question is about, we've read a lot about the impact of lockdown in communities, and I'm wondering if you suspect that there may be some, social unrest or some antisocial behaviour connected to people's just frustration at being locked down. Thank you.
Okay, if I can kind of take those in reverse order, there certainly is, Laura, that there certainly is a frustration out there. People are having anxieties, mental health demands have increased as people have been locked down and their freedom of movement to some degree denied. It is kind of unprecedented. You can't underestimate the impact that's had on people. And for me, the coming out of this, I think we'll see that mental health provision and mental health issues are as important as physical health caused by COVID. I think we've got a mountain about to kind of have an avalanche on us as we come out of COVID in terms of mental health demand. I think you're absolutely correct on that. To do with mental health in custody of young people, it's an issue that's come to my notice through some casework that's come in to my office. We are currently starting a review on this, and not just people with no mental health difficulties that have been assessed by medical professionals, but how do we realise when people are displaying perhaps the signs or symptoms of mental health or mental ill health? We need to be really, really aware of that. And I'd like to have a look into that and kind of give some training and advice about how we can be stronger on that with young people in custody and recognise those signs and symptoms. On the other issue that you raised under 3.4 about the integrated anti-stalking unit, this is something that in previous years was joint funded as a national pilot between policing and health. It's been some really good work to deal with, to help both victims and deal with perpetrators of stalking and domestic abuse and violence. What we did in last year's budget was try to commission an ongoing service. So sorry, I mean the current year's budget, but not next year's that we've just agreed, was to commission a team with health on that. That was one of the main budget priorities. Because of COVID, our partners were delayed in getting that team together. My final scrutiny of the year on this will come in March, where I expect the assurance that that's all back together. The team have been recruited, and you'll note there is budget for the forthcoming year to work. Some money from government, some money topped up by myself, money from government we bidded for to actually treat perpetrators of domestic abuse and to get a whole family kind of approach. And the point of that is to bring a stop to the domestic abuse rather than just separating a family and letting the perpetrator go on to perpetrate the abuse with a new family, if you like. So it's that real grounded recognition of the reality of domestic abuse and stalking that's been recognised. And I think you pointed out in a previous meeting, Laura, if I may, that a lot of deaths of women nationwide were caused by perpetrators where the perpetrator and the victim in their respective parts were already known to the police. That is a key area for us to stop here, because it's happened far too often, and we're totally committed to bringing an end to that. So hopefully that gives a reasonable answer to the three questions. But anything else, Laura, I really will come back to you either privately or through the panel or anything else you need to know. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner, could I just ask, I think you needed to be away at 1:30. There's one final question.
Well, I've got one.
Yeah, I've got you, Paul. Are you okay to take that? Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Councillor Finlow.
Well, you kindly allowed, in the interest of balance, me to speak earlier. So I'm going to give, if I may, very briefly, a bit of balance in relation to the denunciation or the critique offered of Section 60. because there is another side to the story about it, and I seem to recall teaching this in constitutional law, albeit a number of years ago, and my recollection was that you have to have a police superintendent having reasonable belief, which has to be evidenced, that there's going to be serious violence in a specified area, and it would apply for a specified amount of time. I think it was 1 day. So the difference, of course, and the worry about it is it doesn't require suspicion to carry out stop and search. So it is an exceptional, and if it's so it should not be abused. It's an exceptional power for exceptional circumstances where there's grounds, reasonable grounds for anticipating in a particular area is going to be violence, just in the interests of balance.
Thank you, Councillor Finlow, and I'm pleased to say there's been good balance today across the spectrum. And, you know, I'm very proud of the way we've conducted ourselves. And if there are no more questions, I need to leave to take this call. And I know the Commissioner's got a pressing engagement as well. But I'd just like to thank all members for a good outcome. We were never all going to agree. And as a very good boss said to me for my last role, you can have an argument without falling out. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll leave it now.
Evan, can I just perhaps remind you that now the meeting has come to an end, myself and Martin would like the opportunity, and I believe you said